Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My daughter-in-law, Emily, had just received the biggest news of her life, a long-awaited promotion. The whole house buzzed with excitement. I watched her glow as she got ready, her husband, my son, proudly buttoning his shirt beside her. There was laughter, perfume in the air, and the clinking of jewelry. They were going to celebrate that night. Everyone was invited, except me. I stayed quiet, pretending to be busy folding the laundry, though my hands trembled slightly. I told myself it was fine, that maybe they wanted a private evening. But when I saw the car pull away, packed with smiles, I felt a quiet ache settle deep inside me. Hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. Heat up the leftovers in the fridge. Don't waste them. For a long minute, I just stared at the screen. The same woman whose child I once cradled in my arms, whose home I helped keep warm, was now telling me to eat leftovers, while the rest of them were out celebrating. I typed back one word. Okay. Then I stood up, looked around the quiet house, and realized I didn't belong there anymore. I packed my small suitcase, just a few clothes, my old photo album, and the knitting needles I used to make scarves for everyone. I took one last look at the family pictures on the wall, my son's graduation, his wedding, and that one Christmas when we all wore matching sweaters. Then I left. No anger, no note. Just silence. When they came home later that night, filled with laughter and the scent of expensive food, they found my room empty. My son called out for me, once, twice. Then he noticed the folded blanket, the clean teacup by the sink, and the open wardrobe. Emily's eyes widened. On the kitchen table lay a small card. It read, "Thank you for everything. Take care of each other." Mom, and that was when the laughter stopped. The house that once felt full now felt unbearably empty. Days passed before they found where I had gone, a small, peaceful home for seniors in another town. My son came to see me, tears in his eyes. Emily followed quietly behind, holding a bouquet of flowers. She knelt beside me and whispered, "I'm sorry." I was proud, but I forgot who made me strong enough to reach that point. I smiled softly and said, "Success is sweetest when shared with the ones who built your foundation." The message. Sometimes, we forget the quiet figures who shaped us, the ones who sacrificed their comfort to build ours. Gratitude isn't about grand gestures. It's about remembering the hearts that helped you rise. If you have someone who once stood by you in silence, call them. Say thank you, because love, once neglected, doesn't always wait by the window forever. The evening was supposed to be one of celebration, a night filled with laughter, warmth, and joy. My daughter-in-law, Emily, had finally achieved the promotion she had been chasing for years. Everyone in the house was thrilled for her. My son, the grandchildren, even the neighbors came by to congratulate her. The house was alive with chatter and excitement as they prepared to go out for dinner. I watched from my corner, smiling faintly, quietly folding napkins that no one would use. The sound of heels tapping, the shimmer of perfume, and the buzz of anticipation filled the air. My heart swelled with pride for her, but there was also a quiet ache inside me. The kind you don't show because you know no one will notice. I assumed, maybe foolishly, that I would be part of the celebration too. After all, I had been there when Emily and my son were struggling, when they barely had enough to pay rent, when I cooked for them, babysat, and encouraged them through hard times. But when I saw her place 4 dinner plates on the table, one for my son, one for her, and 2 for the children, and none for me, I understood. The invitation wasn't coming. I tried to tell myself that it didn't matter, that maybe she wanted to celebrate privately with her immediate family. Still, as the car engine roared to life and I watched their silhouettes fade into the night, the silence that followed felt heavy, pressing against my chest. The house seemed too big suddenly. Every tick of the clock echoed in my ears. I tried to distract myself, turned on the television, flipped through the channels, but nothing could drown out the loneliness. The aroma of the perfume she left behind lingered in the air, mixed with the faint scent of the roast I had prepared earlier for the family. Hours passed. I brewed myself some tea and sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the family photo pinned on the fridge, Emily smiling brightly beside my son, my grandchildren clinging to her dress. I was part of that photo, but at that moment, I felt like a shadow in my own home. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. I picked it up expecting maybe a kind word, perhaps a photo of them celebrating. But instead I read, "Heat up the leftovers in the fridge. Don't waste them." For a long time, I just stared at the words. The sting was sharp, deeper than I expected. Leftovers. That's what I had become. A reminder of something used, something to be tolerated but not celebrated. I sat there holding the phone, the glow of the screen reflecting off my eyes, and finally typed one small word, "Okay." I put my phone down and stared into the silence that filled the room after that short, cold exchange. The house felt emptier than ever before. I could still hear faint echoes of laughter in my mind, imagining them at that restaurant, toasting to success, clinking glasses, and sharing stories. My son would be smiling proudly, and the children would be eating their favorite desserts. I should have been there, watching them, proud of the family I helped raise. But instead, I sat there, surrounded by the leftovers she'd told me to heat. I opened the fridge and the bright light spilled out, revealing containers stacked neatly. The smell of reheated food was the only thing left for me that night. As I stood there, spoon in hand, I realized something had changed. This wasn't about the dinner or the leftovers. It was about being unseen, unappreciated, forgotten. I thought back to all the nights I stayed awake when my son was young, nursing his fevers, making sure he had enough to eat when times were hard. I thought about the times I comforted Emily when she and my son fought, the words of encouragement I offered when she doubted herself. I had been there through it all, not because I expected gratitude, but because I loved them. But love, when taken for granted, begins to fade quietly like the last embers of a fire. I walked slowly to my room, each step heavier than the last. The walls, once filled with the laughter of family, now seemed to whisper the truth I had tried to ignore. I sat on the edge of my bed, feeling the softness of the quilt I had sewn myself years ago. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the small wooden drawer beside my bed. Inside were little keepsakes of my life there. A drawing my grandson made for me, an old family photo, a letter from my late husband. Looking at them, I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was as if the house itself was telling me it was time. I folded my clothes neatly, one piece at a time, not rushing, not hesitating. Every sound, the rustle of fabric, the click of the suitcase latch, felt final but peaceful. There was no anger inside me, only acceptance. I wasn't leaving to hurt anyone. I was leaving because I finally understood that I deserved more than being treated like an afterthought. I glanced at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't broken, just tired of giving her love where it was no longer seen. I whispered to her, "It's okay. You've done enough." And with that, I zipped my suitcase shut and placed it gently by the door. I sat quietly for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the only sound left in the stillness of the night. My hands rested on the suitcase handle, and I took a deep breath, letting the memories of this home flow through me one last time. I remembered the day we moved in, how full of life everything felt back then. I could still see my son and Emily unpacking boxes, the children running around with excitement, and me in the kitchen, preparing their first meal in the new house. Back then, every corner of this place carried laughter, love, and belonging. But over the years, that feeling had slowly slipped away, replaced by distance, subtle indifference, and unspoken words. Tonight, it felt like the walls themselves had let go of me too. Before leaving, I walked into the living room and looked around. The family photos on the wall seemed to watch me in silence. There was the one of Emily's graduation, where she stood proudly in her cap and gown. I remembered ironing her gown that morning, making sure not a single wrinkle spoiled her big day. Next to it hung a picture from my son's wedding day, my favorite photo of him, smiling like he had everything he ever dreamed of. I ran my fingers along the frame, feeling the faint layer of dust. Then I turned toward the small table by the window where I used to sit every morning, sipping tea and watching the sunrise. It had been my quiet space, my refuge. I smiled faintly, remembering how I used to wait for the sound of my grandchildren's footsteps rushing down the hall for hugs before school. Those hugs had become rarer lately. I went back to my room and picked up a small card from my drawer. It was plain and simple, just a small thank you note I had received from a neighbor years ago. I flipped it over and decided to leave my own message behind. I took a pen and wrote carefully, "Thank you for everything. Take care of each other. Mom. The words were few, but they carried all the emotion my heart could no longer say aloud. I placed the card on the kitchen table where they would easily see it. Then I took one last look around the house, turning off each light as I went. With every switch, the house grew darker, quieter, almost as if it, too, was preparing to rest. As I reached the front door, I paused. I could see my reflection in the glass, an older woman with kind eyes that had seen too much and expected too little. I whispered a soft goodbye to the home that had once been full of love. Then, with a slow, steady hand, I turned the doorknob and stepped out into the cool night. The air was crisp, and the stars above seemed brighter than they had in a long time. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in years I felt free. Free from the weight of being invisible. Free from the quiet ache of being forgotten. The suitcase rolled softly behind me as I walked down the street, leaving behind not just a house, but a chapter of my life that had finally come to an end. When they returned home later that night, the house was alive with laughter and the scent of fine dining clinging to their clothes. Emily was still radiant from her promotion dinner, her voice full of joy as she shared stories from the evening. The children ran ahead of her, their giggles echoing down the hallway. My son followed behind, slightly tipsy from the wine, humming a tune under his breath. Everything seemed perfect, until the youngest called out, "Grandma, we're home!" The sound of that small, innocent voice hung in the air, but no answer came. At first, they didn't think much of it. My son assumed I was asleep, but when he walked past the kitchen, he noticed something strange. The faint smell of lavender, the one from my room, drifting through the hallway. He turned on the light and stopped in his tracks. My chair by the window was empty. My knitting basket was gone. Even the little shawl I always kept on the back of the chair had disappeared. Emily walked in behind him, still holding her purse, her laughter fading when she saw his expression. "Mom?" he called again, louder this time. No response. He went to my room, knocked lightly, and then opened the door. The bed was neatly made, the pillows perfectly arranged. On the dresser, my framed photo of my late husband was gone, leaving behind only a faint square of dust. My suitcase, which always sat in the corner, wasn't there either. A heavy silence filled the room. Emily's eyes moved slowly around, and that's when she saw it, the small card on the kitchen table. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Her eyes scanned the words written in my careful, slanted handwriting. "Thank you for everything. Take care of each other. Mom." Her breath caught in her throat. The room, once warm and welcoming, suddenly felt cold. My son came closer, reading over her shoulder, and the color drained from his face. The weight of what they'd done, or rather, what they hadn't done, hit them all at once. Emily sank into the nearest chair, her hand over her mouth, realizing that her promotion, her celebration, and her pride had cost something irreplaceable. The children, confused by the tension, asked, "Where's Grandma? Did she go somewhere?" My son didn't answer right away. He walked to the window, staring into the night, his mind replaying every small moment. The times I'd quietly helped, the meals I'd cooked, the smiles he'd taken for granted. He realized how blind he'd been, how silence can speak louder than anger. For the first time in a long time, the home felt lifeless. Even though everyone was inside, Emily set the card down gently and whispered, her voice breaking, she didn't even say goodbye. Her words hung heavy in the air. My son finally turned to her and said softly, "She did, Em. We just didn't listen." That night, no one slept. The laughter that had filled their car on the way home was replaced with the hum of guilt and regret. Emily sat by the window where I used to sit, staring at the empty street, hoping somehow she'd see me walking back. But I was gone, and in my absence, they finally understood something. That love, when ignored too long, doesn't vanish in anger. It leaves quietly, with grace, taking peace with it. Days turned into weeks, and the house no longer felt like a home. The once lively rooms seemed colder, quieter, as if even the walls missed the sound of my footsteps. My son tried to carry on with work, but there was a dullness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The children often asked when Grandma was coming back, and every time Emily's heart twisted a little tighter. She didn't know how to answer them without breaking down. The promotion that once made her feel unstoppable now felt hollow, almost meaningless. The expensive meals, the congratulations from her colleagues, all of it seemed distant. overshadowed by the heavy guilt that lingered in her chest. One morning, Emily found herself sitting at the same kitchen table where I used to sip my tea. She looked at the empty chair across from her, the faint mark where my cup used to rest, and tears slipped down her cheeks. She remembered the times I had waited for her to come home just to ask if she'd eaten, the nights I stayed up late sewing clothes for her children, the countless sacrifices I made quietly in the background. For the first time, she saw me not as the mother-in-law, but as a woman, someone who had lived her whole life giving love without ever demanding it back. That realization hit her harder than any scolding ever could. Unable to bear the silence any longer, Emily convinced my son to find me. It took them days of searching and calling before they finally learned I had moved into a small senior home in another town. They drove there without speaking, the weight of remorse thick between them. When they arrived, I was sitting in the garden, knitting beneath a tree, surrounded by blooming flowers and soft music playing from a nearby radio. My face was calm, peaceful, even smiling slightly. When I saw them approach, I didn't look surprised. I had always known they would come. Emily fell to her knees beside me, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was so busy chasing my dreams that I forgot the person who taught me how to believe in them." My son stood behind her, eyes red, his voice trembling as he said, "Mom, please come home." I looked at them both, my heart heavy yet full of understanding. I placed my hand on Emily's cheek and said softly, "You've built a beautiful life, my dear. But never forget, it's the people who stand behind you in silence who make your strength possible." They stayed with me for a while that day, and for the first time in a long time, we talked, not about achievements or disappointments, but about love, memories, and forgiveness. When they finally left, Emily hugged me tightly, promising that things would change, that she'd never let me feel invisible again. As they walked away, I watched them with a quiet smile. The pain that once lived in my chest had softened, replaced by a deep peace. Sometimes it takes losing something precious to realize how much it truly meant. And though I may not have returned to their home, I knew I had returned to their hearts, and that was enough. From that day on, everything changed. Emily began visiting me every weekend, often bringing the children along. The laughter that once filled my house now echoed in the garden of my new home, softer, but somehow purer. She would sit beside me, helping me knit, listening more than she spoke. My son called me every night just to ask how I was doing, something he hadn't done in years. The distance that had once grown between us slowly faded, replaced by something stronger, understanding. I realized that sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures or expensive dinners. It needs recognition, gratitude, and respect. The lesson wasn't just for them, it was for me too. I learned that walking away wasn't abandonment. It was self-respect. It was a reminder that love must flow both ways to stay alive. Emily's promotion had once been a symbol of pride and independence, but now it became a lesson in humility and grace. She often told me, with tears in her eyes, that my absence had taught her more than any success ever could, that the real measure of achievement isn't how high we rise, but how we treat the people who helped us stand. And so, life moved on, gentler and wiser than before. My home was smaller, quieter, but it was filled with peace. I no longer waited by the window. I lived my days with gratitude, knowing I had left behind not anger, but awareness. Sometimes it takes walking away for others to finally see your worth. And sometimes it takes losing someone's presence to rediscover the meaning of family.